We had over the last 6 month period or so, but in the last, let's just say in the last 3 months, 2.5 months, let's give it, you've had kind of what the Western corporate media is calling a stalemate in the military situation in Ukraine, a stalemate in the conflict on the battlefield. And this was always very much a misconception. It was very much all a distortion of the reality because Russia had announced its partial mobilization and it had been training its troops, and we knew all along that there was going to be an offensive, and that offensive was going to be in the wintertime because that just makes strategic sense for the Russian military, which the Russian military is a winter military. If you know anything about World War II, if you know anything about Russia itself, you know that Russia is a winter country, and it's also a winter military, given just how prepared and how many decades it has prepared under winter conditions. Now, NATO in the United States, different story. But there was this offensive that was always looming and always coming. And now you have the Western corporate media acknowledging this. You remember probably months ago during Kherson and some of these other battles, there was all sorts of enthusiasm about Ukraine is winning, Ukraine is winning. Ukraine is in such good shape. Let's keep pumping Ukraine with military aid, with weapons. And the situation in the last couple months has changed dramatically. They're trying to call it a stalemate in the West in order to cover over and paper over the fact that what a stalemate means, actually, it's just a euphemism for them for a coming defeat, right? The coming decline, the coming collapse of Ukraine's battlefield position, but really of its entire society. Because what NATO is doing is it's putting Ukraine in a comprehensive crisis, in a total crisis, which is very likely to lead to total collapse. So since October, Russia has been firing missiles, firing drone strikes, really affecting and impacting Ukraine's infrastructure. It's affected the military's capabilities, but it's also affected the electricity situation and the energy situation. And I'm going to go over the economic crisis in the second half of portion of this story. But now the Western corporate media is trying to say that Ukraine is in a stalemate, the Ukraine-Russia situation is in a stalemate, and they are now fearing this winter offensive. And so you've heard in the last month, 2 months, right? You've heard Western leaders, you even heard the Biden administration talk about the possibility of peace. And NATO has said that as well. Stoltenberg has been on record now at least a couple of times saying, well, this is going to end in negotiations at some point. But every single time they've always said, not yet, not yet. And the same goes for this discourse, right? This conversation happening in Western corporate media, the Western military industrial complex, the military, the EU. They're saying that a winter offensive is coming against Russia. Russia is going to wage this very soon. And as you all know, there's fighting in Bakhmut. There's fighting happening now, but it's very low level and the battle lines are not moving, right? They're not moving. And that's intentional because Russia hasn't really deployed much of this special mobilization, this partial mobilization yet. So it's really a matter of time. And now the Western corporate media is acknowledging this. And I found The Economist. They wrote this, I believe it was 2 days ago. I found this to be very interesting. There's a lot of fear when it comes to what's about to happen. Okay. And so let me pull this Economist article up because it shows where this is all heading. And you will find, I think, the conclusions made to be absolutely preposterous. So The Economist, everything is behind a paywall, so we've archived it. So if you ever want to archive anything, by the way, go to archive.vn, all right? And you can get paywalled articles. Just paste the link and you'll get it. So here is the article, Looming Russian Offensive. This is from this is really an editorial. Okay, this was written on December 15th. Let me zoom in a bit. And you'll find, I think, the conclusions to be quite interesting because on the one hand, they're saying that this is happening, this is going to be bad. And on the other, they're saying, well, don't give in to Putin. Don't give in to Putin because this desperation is leading to what I would call pearl clutching, trying to clutch whatever they can, whatever this alliance in this project Ukraine, right? In this intervention, in this proxy war on Russia through Ukraine. They're trying to hold on to whatever legitimacy they can, whether it's NATO, the United States, the EU, all of the forces involved, and Ukraine in particular. I mean, Ukraine's leadership is absolutely unhinged and really suicidal in a lot of ways. And they are all trying to uh, while warning about a really dangerous situation coming for them, right? A real turning point coming for them. They're trying to say, well, let's stay on course for now. Let's stay on course. So this is how just absolutely bankrupt these forces are. That they're leading us to the brink, and they'll even acknowledge that something is coming for them, that Russia is coming for them, and it's going to be bad. But nonetheless, they're going to keep going anyway. Right? It's just absolutely ridiculous. So, a looming Russian offensive. Ukraine's chiefs, in an unprecedented series of briefings, tell The Economist about the critical months that lie ahead. So, Russia is amassing men and arms for a new offensive. As soon as January, but more likely in the spring, it could launch a big attack from Donbass in the east, from the south, or even from Belarus, a puppet state in the north. And so I'm going to correct that. There's no puppet state in the north. Belarus is a sovereign country. Everyone's a puppet state of Russia when they have a sovereign policy that's independent of NATO. So Belarus is a sovereign country. It also was once part of the Soviet Union. I know a few people from Belarus, and they've told me that actually Belarus had kept a lot of the social welfare provisions, a lot of the sort of social policies that helped people. They had kept that even through the post-Soviet period. And so Belarus actually had a lot of growth and had made a lot of progress in addressing poverty in recent years. And now, of course, it is caught up in this conflict because it has to be, because it's an existential threat to Belarus as well. And we know that the U.S. has been sanctioning Belarus and has been provoking Belarus as well. So it's not a puppet state in the north. It is merely an ally of Russia that has a sovereign foreign policy that is not dictated by NATO. So Russian troops will aim to drive back Ukrainian forces and could even stage a second attempt to take Kiev, the capital. Those are not our words, but the assessment of the head of Ukraine's armed forces, General Valery Zaluzny. In an unprecedented series of briefings within the past fortnight, the general, along with Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, and General Oleksandr Syrskyi, the head of its ground forces, warned us of the critical few months ahead. The Russians are preparing some 200,000 fresh troops, General Zaluzny told us. I have no doubt they will have another go at Kiev. Western sources say that Russia's commander, General Sergei Surovikin, has always seen this as a multi-year conflict, and this is not the view outside Ukraine. In the freezing month, the conflict is thought to be deadlocked. There has been almost no movement for a month along the 1,000-kilometer or so battlefront. Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, Britain's most senior officer, this week said that right now a shortage of artillery shells means that Russia's scope for ground operations is rapidly diminishing. So a lot of propaganda here. For one, the big propaganda is that they're acting like this is new. So there's 200,000 fresh Russian troops coming in. That's been known for a long time, since the partial mobilization. So that's propaganda talking point number one. And then here you have propaganda talking point number two, where they're talking about how the reason why there's been no movement on the battlefront is because there's a lack of artillery shells for Russia. Russia actually is in a pretty good military situation. They have production reoriented, and there's a reason why they've changed strategy. There's a reason why they are not so much fighting on the battlefront as much as they are fighting in the air through missile strikes, not necessarily through bombs being dropped or missiles being dropped by an air force, but they are launching drones, launching missiles, and that is not because they can't wage an offensive right now. It's because they are going through a methodical strategy of, one, weakening Ukraine's military, demilitarization through the infrastructure component, crippling the military. And you see in places like Bakhmut and the Duran, we'll get into this when I bring up the video, you see how Ukraine's military, with these shortcomings, right, with the damage that's been done, is consistently and constantly just bringing more and more people back to the front lines in places like Bakhmut after experiencing losses, and that's creating a drain situation. There's a military drain on Ukraine's military capabilities. So that in and of itself is propaganda to say that the Russia's ability to wage a ground operation is rapidly diminishing. Actually, Russia never had plans to wage incredible front lines ground operations. That really wasn't what Russia wanted to do. They wanted to help the Donbass, the special military operation, now a counterterrorism operation. It's all about trying to lose as few people possible with the greatest possible results. So let's move on. The appearance of a stalemate is feeding new interest in peace talks. So this is what's funny. Suddenly the West is interested in peace, but Russia is the one losing. And you'll see how they try to twist this around. So France's President Emmanuel Macron, America's Joe Biden, and for different reasons, the Russian aggressor, Vladimir Putin, have all in recent days talked about a diplomatic solution. Many in the West, appalled at the suffering and more selfishly wearying of high energy prices, would welcome this. But Ukraine's commanders argue that it shouldn't happen too soon, and they are right. So here's the propaganda big time, all right? First of all, they had to say Russian aggressor, right? So they had to say the Russian aggressor, Vladimir Putin, for different reasons. They won't tell you what those reasons are here, though, right? They're trying to act like the West is so benevolent, that Macron and Biden are so benevolent, despite the fact that from the very beginning, both of these forces, I mean, we know Macron has had a kind of rhetoric position of wanting to meet Russia's security guarantees and wanting to facilitate that process, but it hasn't. Let's be honest. France hasn't done that. And France is a very key member of NATO and has supported this from the very beginning. And let's not get into Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden, Sleepy Joe, this guy has been a complete and utter nightmare. He is the leading force. I mean, someone like him being the leading force is scary enough, but he is a rabid imperialist, a rabid warmonger, and he has been at the front lines of pushing this. So really, they should move this aggressor term to Joe, in between America's Joe Biden, because that's the real truth here. So now you have Ukraine's commanders, Ukraine's military saying, no. Yeah, there's been talk of this peace thing, but let's not. We don't want that. And here's why. If Ukraine, and this is why the economist thinks it's right? This is how absolutely brain dead these people are. If Ukraine sought to stop the war today, freezing the battle lines where they are, the Russians could prepare for the next attack. Mr. Putin's generals have been pushing on with the program of training and deploying newly mobilized troops and retooling industry to help the war effort, including, say, Ukrainian commanders, by producing artillery shells. A freeze would repeat the mistake of the 3 years leading up to the invasion on February 24, 2022. In that time, Mr. Putin talked endlessly to the West leaders who indulged him while all readying his armies for invasion, while all the while. So this is just pure propaganda, okay? First of all, yes, of course, Russia would be able to better prepare if Ukraine just stopped. But at the same time, if Ukraine stopped its absolutely suicidal military campaign, egged on, backed up, and facilitated by the collective West, Russia would most likely stop as well. This isn't. This is how they try to sell you this Cold War ideology that Russia is so nefarious that it's just going to undermine Ukraine as soon as Ukraine drops its guard down. That's what the economist wants you to think. And then it's telling you, okay, this is true, right? Newly mobilized troops. Yes, Russia has retooled its industries. Russia has done everything it can to be stable in this period, and that's worked pretty incredibly. And now it's saying that a freeze would repeat the same mistake of the last 3 years leading up to the invasion of February 24, 2022. So what they're saying is that Vladimir Putin bamboozled the West, that Putin only feigned diplomacy, that Putin spent 3 years. And I'm curious about this timeline, right? 3 years. Because we could go back, what? We know what Merkel said, right? We could go back 7 years, right? 7+ years with the Minsk agreements. And we know what Angela Merkel said, the former chancellor of Germany. What did she say? She said that the collective West was the one that was lying about diplomacy, that it was that it was saying it agreed and mediated these ceasefire talks within Ukraine, right, to stop the massacre in the Donbass. But actually what they were doing is just buying time for Ukraine's military to prevent a Russian intervention and to buy time for Ukraine's military to be able to be armed, souped up, and ready to fight this proxy war on Russia. So this is just a complete and utter propaganda talking point, saying that it was Putin that was being disingenuous. Well, actually, Putin was very much interested in the Minsk Accords. He could have easily, right? He could have easily abandoned the Donbass. He could have easily abandoned the West, easily abandoned these Minsk Accords, because the Donbass had already, right, Lugansk, Donetsk, these republics had already declared independence. And then we know Crimea as well, and Crimea was integrated into Russia. But we know that basically all of the Donbass at that time was ready for a similar Crimea result, right? It was ready. And Russia said, no, we're not going to intervene in that way right now. And of course, Syria was happening. There's a lot of considerations. Russia did not want to be outstretched. And, there had just been a coup and things were pretty intense. And so Russia said, no, let's wait and see. Let's do this ceasefire. Let's try to choose diplomacy. So it's just absolutely propaganda to say, absolute lies to say that it was the West who indulged Putin. And while he was readying for the invasion, that's absolutely false. Absolutely false. Of course, Russia was preparing itself for the worst because a coup had just happened in 2014. Why wouldn't it? Why would there had been talks about Ukraine in NATO to be sucked up into NATO, become a NATO member since 2008, since 2008. And Russia, right, saw the writing on the wall after the Maidan coup. We're going to talk about Odessa, but there were people, labor unions, workers who were burned alive by the Maidan coup members. And then these Maidan coup architects, they then waged a bloody massacre in the Donbass. And so the writing was on the wall. Donbass is right on Russia's border. Let's get real here. The writing was on the wall. So of course Russia was preparing, but it's just absolute propaganda to say that it was the West that was indulging him. Absolutely not. We can just look back a year ago. Vladimir Putin was saying, let's talk United States, let's talk NATO, let's talk about neutrality, let's talk about our security interests, let's talk about a compromise. And what did they say? They said, go F yourself. They said, we're not talking to you. So that's what really happened. So this is the end of it here. The West's highest responsibility is to ensure that any Russian counteroffensive fails. For that, the supply of weapons must increase and fast. Ukraine has used HIMARS, a rocket system Americans have been supplying since June, to devastating effect against Russian ammunition dumps and command and control centers, allowing rapid advance in the northeast and then in the south. But Russia has moved many such targets back out of range of Ukraine's HIMARS battery. So Ukraine needs more powerful ordnance like the A. So they're literally telling, this is literally what The Economist is saying they need to do. They need ATACMS missiles that could hit targets at least twice as far away. And it needs a lot of them, as well as regular ammunition and artillery of all kinds, plus tanks and helicopters and much else too. Oh, actually, there's some more to go. But basically what it's saying is help Ukraine, arm Ukraine, right? Russian attacks on electrical, water, and heating systems are happening, and these are aimed at wrecking Ukraine's economy and battering the morale of the troops. We need to stop this. And Zaluzny has said that Ukraine is low on stocks of ammunition against its existing defense systems. It needs many more and better anti-missile defenses, and now wants American patriots. This was announced. You probably have been watching Brian Berletic's The New Atlas. He talked about this, and that they will seem to be forthcoming, but training soldiers to use them takes time, and they should have been supplied months ago. So here you go. More weapons. Let's keep going. And if Ukraine is to emerge as a thriving democracy, even air defense will not be enough. It needs to recapture more territory. So the war is not over, guys, to them. The conflict is not over. They're going to keep going. They want to keep going. All right. The collective West, the corporate media, mainstream corporate media, and Ukraine's generals, Ukraine's military, they're saying let's keep doing this, despite the fact that it doesn't look good right now. So, this is what is happening, okay? And I don't even have to go through the rest. By contrast, if Ukraine cuts the land bridge, blah 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 blah. So there's a lot of things. They want more territory. They want to take this land bridge that can resupply Crimea and threaten the south of the country. So they want to cut that out. They want to retake the northern coast of the Sea of Azov. They want to negotiate from strength, they say. They want to negotiate from strength. That just means they don't want to negotiate at all. Just FYI. So Ukraine is willing to make sacrifices that fighting on demands. To make the sacrifices that fighting demands. Okay, that's definitely an error. Mr. Zelensky told us that 95% or 96% want to deoccupy their territory. Zelensky is a known liar. So, first of all, if 90+% of people in the Donbass want to join Russia, it's highly unlikely that 90% of them want Russia out. He argues that Western promises on security guarantees are a poor substitute for his country's territorial integrity. Similar guarantees were offered by blah, blah, blah in 1994. So basically what he's saying is give us more weapons, give us more of that public relations that we're actually sovereign while we're actually a puppet to you. And here's what the West thinks. Ukraine's backers believe that taking everything is a maximalist aim that Ukraine will struggle to achieve, not least because it will in places mean freeing people who do not want to be liberated. Mr. Putin and his nuclear threats are a reason to ensure Russia is not victorious, but also a reason to require that Ukraine does not appear to threaten Russia's recognized borders. Ukraine also needs to understand that the flow of military and financial aid depends on it avoiding internal rivalries that may be emerging and on ensuring that it curbs long-standing corruption. That said, the entire world, including Russia, would benefit from the failure of the rancidous idea that the old Russian Empire can be recreated. So here's the propaganda. If Ukraine is adequately supported, its commanders can push a long way towards the coast and possibly take back most of what Mr. Putin had seized since February. The more territory that Ukraine can recover, the greater the chances of its lasting success. So that's what The Economist thinks. And I got to say, it's a fantasy. It's a fantasy. First of all, here is the tension you can feel, right? The tension is that the generals want more weapons. And the West, the collective West, is trying to say, look, we don't have them. But what they don't want to say is we won't ever have them for you. They say it takes time, right? Training on the Patriot missiles. It takes time to get these weapons to you, but we have to have certain conditions. You have to follow our rules. You have to follow our lead. You can't just go and do whatever you want. You have to be a good puppet. You can't be this, what Ukraine has been. You can't be this kind of just loose cannon puppet, right? A loose cannon, you keep falling off the hand. You're like, I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to do that missile attack on Poland, the Crimea terrorist attack. I'm going to do all that stuff and it's okay, right? No. The U.S., NATO, the collective West, they don't want Ukraine to be acting like this because they're in this for the long haul. They want the profits to keep going to the military-industrial complex. They want the possibility of Ukraine being a member of NATO maybe in the future. They want these possibilities to be there when the timing is right. But at the same time, there's this tension of, well, how can we hold off on going too fast and letting Ukraine go too fast? How can we fight their corruption, right? Curb their corruption and also, right, take stock of the battlefield. They even said it right there. They said, well, actually, you're not going to liberate people who don't want to be liberated. Meaning that this 95% number is a complete lie. And so the collective West even knows that. Anyone with a brain, anyone who's been paying attention, who has a brain that's functioning, right, understands that. But at the same time, you have this intense need. This is the military-industrial complex talking, to dump weapons on Ukraine, right? They're trying to say, well, it's going to be a little hard, but we need to push things forward. And the only way we can push things forward is if there's more fighting. These weapons need to be used so we can continue to recycle them through. The problem is that NATO is basically out of weapons. The U.S. would have to dig into its own stockpiles. It's hesitant to do that because of how outstretched its military, its empire is. But at the same time, there's this tension. It's like we want to give more weapons. We don't really have them. We want more fighting, but we need it to be slow and methodical. But that's not how this works. That's not how Ukraine works. That's not how NATO works, right? Really, all this is just mental gymnastics to get around the fact that the situation is pretty untenable. The situation is pretty untenable. Ukraine is in real big trouble. Russia is not in big trouble. Russia has the capacity to continue to expand its operations. This article acknowledged that it has 200,000 troops on the way. This winter offensive is coming for Ukraine, and it's going to put NATO on notice, right? It's going to really demonstrate to the world that this was never what NATO and what the United States, what Biden, what the collective was said it was. It was never Ukraine was going to win. Ukraine was going to save democracy in the region, save democracy in Ukraine. It was going to defeat this autocrat and authoritarian Putin. It was never like that, right? It was always an operation, always a permanent war, an attempt to intensify the US's agenda with Russia, which is regime change. It was an attempt to facilitate and fuel this new Cold War in a very intense way, in a way that it's hard to say whether NATO understood and the United States understood that they weren't really prepared for this. And now the winter is coming, and Russia's winter offensive is here very soon. They're saying spring. I think that's optimistic, but perhaps it will take a little longer for Russia to complete its objectives by these missile strikes. Maybe. It may be. And we know that fighting in Bakhmut is happening. And, there's a lot going on that indicates that Ukraine's in real big trouble.